When rescuers arrived in the Ural Mountains, they found something that has haunted investigators for over 60 years. A mystery so strange, so disturbing, that to this day it remains unsolved. High in the snowbound wilderness, a campsite lay abandoned. The wind howled through torn canvas, the tent shredded from the inside, as if the people within had clawed their way out in panic. Their boots, coats, even food were left behind. Scattered across the frozen slope were bodies, half buried in snow. Some wore little more than shirts and underwear, as though they had fled barefoot into the night. At first, the scene suggested a desperate attempt to survive brutal cold, but the further rescuers searched, the stranger it became. Several bodies bore catastrophic injuries, fractured skulls, broken ribs, damage more consistent with a car crash than a mountain accident. One woman's eyes were missing, another had lost her tongue. Nothing about the campsite matched the rational explanation. Soldiers, scientists, even forensic experts pored over the details, but every discovery only deepened the riddle. And the final revelation, what they found last, was so bizarre, so out of place, it refuses to fit any theory. To understand how this nightmare unfolded, we need to go back to where it all began. In January of 1959, 10 students from the Ural Polytechnic Institute set out on what should have been the adventure of a lifetime. At their head was 23-year-old Igor Dyatlov, a brilliant engineering student and an experienced outdoorsman with a reputation for discipline and determination. Beside him were 9 friends, young men and women bound by ambition, laughter, and the thrill of conquering one of the harshest terrains on Earth. They were the kind of group that seemed untouchable. In photographs taken along the way, you can still see their smiles. Arms thrown around one another, cheeks flushed from the cold, the kind of carefree joy that belongs only to youth. They carried guitars, cracked jokes, and scribbled diary entries filled with inside humor. To them, the Ural Mountains were not a threat, but a challenge, something to be conquered with teamwork and grit. They couldn't have known that the mountains they chose weren't ordinary. The place they were headed carried a name that should have given anyone pause: Kholat Syakhl, the Mountain of the Dead. For generations, the indigenous Mansi people whispered warnings about this peak, claiming it was cursed. Hunters avoided it. Elders spoke of restless spirits that prowled its slopes. One chilling phrase lingered in their folklore: the mountain devours those who disrespect it. To the Soviet hikers, however, these stories were little more than superstition. They were children of science, raised in an era where folklore was dismissed as relics of a primitive past. Dyatlov and his team likely laughed off the warnings, viewing the mountain as nothing more than snow, stone, and wind. For them, danger came in the form of avalanches and frostbite, not angry spirits. Yet the Mansi avoided the peak for a reason. They told tales of hunters who disappeared, of eerie lights dancing in the sky, of sudden storms that struck without warning. The landscape itself seemed to resist intrusion, as if guarding secrets it didn't want uncovered. Looking back, it's hard not to wonder if the hikers' skepticism was their undoing, if the fate that awaited them was a fulfillment of the legends. The journey began smoothly until the mountain started pushing back. At first, the expedition unfolded with a rhythm of countless others before it, boots crunching in snow, backpacks heavy, spirits high. The hikers sang songs to keep pace, teased one another, and scribbled diary entries filled with inside humor. One wrote, "The weather is bad, but we are laughing. We will conquer everything." Another joked about frozen socks, as if discomfort itself was part of the adventure. But the Ural wilderness does not forgive easily. Winds howled across the ridges, dropping temperatures far below freezing. Snowstorms thickened, blinding them and slowing their march. But then, one member of the group suddenly turned back. Among the 10 who began the journey, only one would ever walk away alive. His name was Yuri Yudin, a 21-year-old student who, just days into the trek, was forced to turn back due to crippling joint pain and illness. At the time, it felt like failure. He had trained for months, and now he would miss the expedition's triumph. But that decision, made reluctantly on the trail, saved his life. Years later, Yuri would confess something chilling. He said he sometimes wished he had died with them, because what he saw after the investigation haunted him forever. His friends' bodies told a story that made no rational sense. They hadn't simply frozen, and they hadn't simply victim to the mountain. Their injuries defied explanation. Their behavior made no logical sense, and the official answers never truly matched the evidence. For the rest of his life, Yuri carried that burden, the knowledge that his illness had spared him from a fate too horrifying to comprehend, yet bound him forever to the questions that would never be answered. With 9 left, the group marched toward their final campsite. On February 1st, the 9 hikers reached the slope of Kholat Syakhl. By then, the weather had turned against them. gone. Biting winds, heavy snowfall, and visibility shrinking to almost nothing. Instead of pressing into the forest where the trees would have offered shelter, Dyatlov made a puzzling decision. He ordered the group to set up camp right there on the exposed mountain side. Some speculate it was a mistake, perhaps born of exhaustion and poor visibility. Others believe Dyatlov had a plan, that he wanted to train his group under the harshest conditions, to prove their skill by enduring the open slope. Whatever the reason, that choice placed them in one of the most unforgiving environments imaginable. The scene they left behind says everything. A lone tent, half buried in snow, standing against the endless white. Around them stretched miles of desolation, no villages, no travelers, nothing but silence, broken by the occasional moan of the wind. They were utterly alone, 9 souls on a mountain that carried the weight of legend. Yet their final photographs hint at something more. Amid shots of camp life and snow-covered ridges are blurred images, strange streaks of light slashing across the night sky. To this day, no one agrees on what they were. Flares, meteors, or something more unearthly. It was their last night alive, and then nothing, until the rescue teams arrived. When rescue teams finally reached the campsite, what they found defied logic. The tent was stood collapsed and half buried in snow, but what made investigators freeze was the way it had been opened. The canvas was slashed from the inside, as if the hikers had clawed their way out in blind panic. Their boots, coats, even food sat untouched. Everything they would have needed to survive left behind in haste. The search fanned out across the mountainside. Soon they found the first bodies. 2 hikers lying near the edge of the forest, their bare feet frozen into the snow. Nearby 3 more were discovered, sprawled in different directions as if trying to crawl back towards the tent. Their clothing was equally inadequate for the brutal cold. But the strangest discoveries were yet to come. Months later, when the snow finally melted, 4 more bodies were uncovered in a ravine. These did not look like victims of frostbite. 1 had a shattered skull, 2 had crushed ribs, injuries so severe they were compared to the force of a car crash. 1 woman's eyes were missing, another had lost her tongue. Nothing about the campsite matched a rational explanation. Soldiers, scientists, even forensic experts pored over the details, but every discovery only deepened the riddle. And the final revelation, what they found last, was so bizarre, so out of place, it refuses to fit any theory. Theories began flooding in, but none could fully explain what happened. In the decades since the tragedy, investigators, journalists, and armchair sleuth have tried to force order onto the chaos, but every theory unravels as quickly as it's stitched together. The most common explanation is the avalanche theory. On the surface, it makes sense. A sudden wall of snow could have sent the hikers scrambling from their tent in panic. But this explanation crumbles under scrutiny. The slope where they camped was too shallow for a large avalanche. Their injuries, crushed ribs, fractured skulls, were far too severe and inconsistent with being swept along by snow. And what about the missing eyes and tongue? An avalanche cannot explain that. Others turn to the possibility of military testing. The Ural Mountains were a remote and secretive region, the perfect place for the Soviet military to experiment with weapons. Some of the hikers' clothing contained trace amounts of radiation. Witnesses from nearby villages reported strange glowing orbs in the sky on the night they died. Could the group have stumbled into a test of parachute mines or chemical weapons? If so, perhaps the authorities knew and buried the truth. That leads to the whispers of KGB involvement. Files vanished. Witness testimonies contradicted one another. Some documents remain sealed to this day. Was the group silenced because they saw something they weren't supposed to? Were they targets of an operation disguised as an accident? And then, of course, comes the most unsettling possibility: UFOs and the supernatural. The eerie photographs, the lights in the sky, the injuries that seemed unearthly in origin. Some believe the hikers encountered something not of this world, a presence beyond human understanding, one that left its mark in ways no forensic report could ever capture. Each theory seeks to impose reason, but none fully explains the terror frozen into that mountain. Some files remain classified to this day, leaving only fragments, contradictions, and whispers. But none of these theories can answer the final, most haunting detail. Even after endless investigations, the strangest details remain untouched by reason. The tent, slashed open from the inside, the bodies, some burned, some stripped of clothing, radiation lingering on scraps of fabric, the crushed bones and shattered skulls, the missing eyes, the missing tongue. Each fragment contradicts the last, leaving only a puzzle that refuses to be solved. The Dyatlov Pass Incident endures not as a story of answers, but of questions. Standing on that snowbound slope today, you can almost hear the wind carrying echoes of that night, the footsteps fleeing into darkness, the silence that followed, the secrets buried beneath ice. So what really happened on Dyatlov Pass? Was it nature, man, or something else entirely? No one can say for certain, and maybe, just maybe, the mountain still holds its secrets, waiting for the next to disturb it.